Hello, Professor Didi here to talk to you today about media. Media is an important role in any situation in politics, whether it be American media for American politics, Russian media for what they do, China, etc. The mass media strongly influences politics, and politics is dependent on communication. One could not exist really without the other. Fewer Americans are interested in news, and that parallels the decline of political interests. There is no time to really be well informed. Media appeals to different audiences based on age, income, and education. Face-to-face is the best way to communicate for political leaders, and that's on television or with online things. TV is the prime source for receiving news. But today the internet and blogs are shaping media. Podcasting has become a new way for people to communicate. Media is television, it's blogs, it's newspapers, it's internet, it's all those things. The mass media has always played an important role in U.S. politics. In 1959, 80% of U.S. homes had TVs, and most people got their news from newspapers. By 1997, 17% of all homes were actually connected to the internet with dial-up. Today, it's well over 85%. In the early days of American journalism, many newspapers were tied to the political parties. In the 1800s, yellow journalism, the reporting of sensationalized stories, was common. Things like Remember the Maine, President Cleveland's out-of-wedlock child. Readership has fallen because of the speed of other media. At one time, most cities had 2 to 4 newspapers. Now most just have 1. The political impact of papers is declining as readership declines. Today, people buy the newspapers on Sundays for the ads. Years ago, local people owned local newspapers. Now it's giant conglomerates owning a majority of media. Radio used to be the most important of all media, especially during World War I and II. Franklin Roosevelt with his fireside chats and how people reacted to those. Radio talk shows influenced the public and legislators. The late Rush Limbaugh was able to encourage millions of people to react on things he said. Talk show politics like that started in the 1980s and played a huge role in a lot of elections. It's bias, but people are listening to it, and it makes money for stations. More media outlets are owned by a small conglomerate of corporations like Clear Channel. News services produce news for most radio and television news programs. Quality is limited due to the resources and finances. The stories lack depth at times. With journalism, resources are getting tighter, and more media are depending upon wire services like the AP or Reuters to provide news for people because they really can't reach out to those other areas. Reporters have become generalists because they cover a variety of stories. AM radio is popular for talk show stuff because it's listened to predominantly by white males, whereas television during those same viewing hours of basically 9:30 in the morning to about 2 in the afternoon are dominated by women listeners and viewers. Why is there a perceived bias as far as when it comes to media? Political socialization. People who grew up in liberal households are going to be more liberal. People who grew up in conservative households, more conservative. And if you think about it with journalists, all journalists are biased, some more than others. Studies show most journalists are liberals. Most owners of media are conservatives. Journalists are human beings. They can slant a story at times. The goal of any journalist is accuracy, balance, fairness, and bipartisanship, a bias against those in power. With media owners being rich white males, sometimes it's hard for the voice of women and minorities to be heard. The difference between elite media and other mass media is while elite media has a much smaller audience, it has a larger influence. Not all media are equal. Elite media like the New York Times and Washington Post are read by influential people. When a story is put in those papers, it is considered gospel, the truth. It's elite because people who read them are wealthier and more powerful and better educated and have more influence. The more prestigious the media outlet, the more weight a story is given. There was a time when personal lives were not reported on, but the Watergate scandal in 1972 changed all that after the break-in of Democratic Party headquarters and the Nixon administration's efforts to cover it up in the Watergate scandal. It was journalists that broke the story that led to President Nixon's resignation. Today, media people are now well-known figures in society, in part due to Watergate. The media did not get Richard Nixon. Nixon got himself. The media has always had an adversarial relationship with the people they cover, and they should. In some countries, like Russia, this can cost reporters their lives. Social media has changed a lot. In 1989, there was no internet. There are thousands more media resources, and it's growing constantly with cable, the internet, blogging, etc. More places to get more information. But accuracy is another thing. Just because it's on Google doesn't mean it's true. It means it's on Google. You have sources like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. New leaders and new places for leaders to go as far as to put information out to the public, bypassing the mainstream media. It's unfiltered. You get the control of the message. And it doesn't even have to be true sometimes. It's your message. And if your believers believe it, that's good enough. The media at times can set the agenda. They report and you decide if it's considered important. Bad news and scandals sells. Look at the National Enquirer and their sales. People are getting their news online. It's quick, it's easy, with some breaking stories. But it often lacks depth. The media has changed politics because news cycles are now 24/7. The political impact of social media and the internet is growing. Online news is growing, especially among younger Americans in Generation Z. Social media can catch stories that regular media sometimes can miss and overlook, in part due to the independence of things like that. Especially in Baltimore, there's a publication called the Baltimore Brew that only has a couple people working full-time, but they break a lot of stories. In the Middle East, the most popular media is Al Jazeera. China, Iran, North Korea have restricted their media. You can't report bad things. It can cost you your life and send you to jail. The internet's changing things with blogging and a variety of other things. It's faster than TV. Television's still the biggest source of news for people. TV with its visual images impacts people. Things like Hurricane Katrina, the Vietnam War, and riots. There's an expression in TV, if it bleeds, it leads. News has become lopsided with media events to attract voters. Plan an event, tell the media to come and film it, and they will come and film it. The short time frame of television news weakens the in-depth analysis that a story might have. Sometimes you just have to report the event. You can't analyze it for a long period of time because news is so quick. Television news sometimes is just a headline service. Television news has drawbacks, including talking heads and shallow reporting with very little details. From personal experience, sometimes it's hard to get in-depth on a story. Foreign news gets underreported because many Americans are geographically challenged. Even the Ukraine gets complicated for people. News sometimes is more entertainment than anything. When you watch coverage on NBC when the Olympics are coming up, they often do stories on the nightly news about the Olympic athletes. Well, the reason they do that is they cover the Olympics. Cross-promotion. People will believe on what's on TV, even if it's a lie. Jimmy Fallon, Stephen Colbert, those places are considered legitimate for candidates to go to show up. Before 1980, it was just ABC, NBC, and CBS. There was no CNN. In the 60s, television put the civil rights movement in Vietnam on people's television screens. One of the problems in campaign seasons is something called horse-race journalism. And it's the practice of media coverage where they focus on polling, who's winning and who's losing, and sometimes not what the candidate says, unless it's an absolute blunder. It's focused on, well, who's doing well, what do the polls say, instead of, well, this candidate's idea is absolutely idiotic, or this candidate's idea is brilliant. TV reduces the influence of political parties in the nominating process. It includes passiveness and apathy because citizens are not engaged with each other. TV saturates viewers with ads and political news, causing viewers to lose interest sometimes. Sometimes it's too much information. Television has changed politics in several ways. It's enhanced incumbent recognition. Television is president-centered and raises expectations for presidents. When things go on, they look at the White House first and what to cover there. Other institutions like Congress and the courts and the bureaucracy get less coverage. Often only if a scandal occurs, they get covered. Political leaders want to frame a story, so the media will report it a certain way. Framing a story guides the media coverage and shapes the public's view on the issue. Officials want to be seen in a positive light. Television personalities have become opinion leaders. Men like Walter Cronkite, Edward R. Murrow, Tucker Carlson. Sometimes it's their voice and people say whatever they say, it's got to be true, even if it's not. How well does the media serve Americans? Media often failed in war coverage because everyone's first reaction when a war starts is let's rally around the flag and then ask questions later, kind of like with Vietnam and Iraq. Media should have an adversarial relationship. In other words, question what the government's doing. Unfortunately, during the Iraq War, this wasn't done till it was much too late. The government had a policy, you can't show coffins coming into Dover Air Force Base because they didn't want people to turn against the war. The adversarialness can be good in a way because it means that media is challenging what the government's saying. And that's what we want it to do in a non-biased way, not just spewing things for the sake of spewing it to get ratings. The rise of the adversarial relationship between the media and government began in the 60s and the 70s with Watergate and Vietnam. The First Amendment offers freedom of the press. Lawsuits on the grounds of libel, written lies, and slander, spoken lies, both done with malice and intent to damage a person, are often the only defense against a reckless media. It's up to citizens to seek a variety of different media, but there is no time to do that because people have certain styles of news they like, a certain newscaster program they're comfortable with. Communication is critical in politics. People who can't communicate sometimes just need to shut up. A couple little other observations about media. People will have a bias against things, whether it's Fox Sports, ESPN, MSNBC, CNN, etc. People generally like to watch the media they're comfortable with, that's giving them the news in some ways they want to hear and they will be comfortable with. That's why sometimes there's media bias. Take care and have a great day.